Kenrith has just won moxmasters that finished yesterday in the making of this video with 141 entries, so that's a lot of participants. In the top 4 we have Adam on Kenrith, 4 wins, 3 draws, a total win rate of 57.14. Then we have Kedis, Bjorn and Cisse, Weatherlight Captain. Would you look at that? We had 6 players playing Atraxa. Sadly, Atraxa, the Grand Unifier, didn't perform that well this time. Kenrith in general also didn't perform that good, it was just that one player that won the tournament. Kinnan, on the other hand, actually performed quite well. You have no losses among the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different Kinnan players. And Nayela also performed kinda bad, sadly. Now Kenrith is not a heavily played commander in various cEDH tournaments. From 64 decks, we have a total average win rate of 21%. And in this video we're gonna dig deep into why Kenrith and pretty much how you probably should build Kenrith. But to give you some perspective to that, let's look at Atraxa that has a 23.5 win rate from 84 decks. We have Krik on almost 20. We have Nayela on 22.5. Rogsai on 22 basically, and Tayam on, yeah, kinda 24. And then Tivit on 21.24. You see, I have something of a leaderboard that I continuously update now and then. So this win rate will change over time as I collect more and more data from more and more continuous updated tournaments. Also, there's a limited supply of commanders I've currently calculated on, but I'm building more on the collection as well. I actually think that Kinnan might be the next one I'm gonna look into, because we have 162 entries, so that's a lot of entries, so we should be able to see something from it. And as you saw in the most previous tournament, Kinnan was performing kinda good. Now let's take a look at the Kenrith winning deck on his Mox field. We're playing Teferi, the only planeswalker, 26 creatures, a mixture of Kinnan in here, a mixture of Dorks, Bloomtender Bird, Noble Hierarch, Deathrite Shaman, Ignoble Hierarch. We have a bunch of stacks cards, Orcus Bowmaster, Oppo Agent, Mayhem Devil, Ranger Captain of Eos. Then we can combo with Displacer Kitten, Dockside, Emil, Faza's Oracle. We have Demonic Tutor, obviously, Culling Ritual, no Mnemonic Betrayal, no Adnos, apparently. But we do play Intuition, which means that we are playing Underworld Breach, obviously. Survival of the Fittest, I kinda like that, because Kenrith can actually assemble combos from the graveyard with the enchantment. Touch the Spirit Realm, a good removal that goes through Grand Abolisher. The One Ring, Wishclaw Talisman, Lion's Diamond, obviously, and there's gonna be a Brain Freeze to assemble the Underworld Breach combo, basically. 28 lands, no City of Traitors, but we're also not on Adno, so that kind of makes sense, but we are playing Ancient Tomb. But in general, this is more or less a typical Kenrith build that can win with actually quite a lot of different combos. We have Teferi Displacer, we have Dockside with Emil, Mayhem Devil, Phantasmal Image. We have Survival of the Fittest to assemble that. We have Underworld Breach combo. So the only thing we're kinda missing would be an Adnos in that case. The average CMC ratio on this list is actually kinda low. I actually think you could put an Adnos inside this deck, honestly. I mean, look at the CMC ratio on these artifacts. We have a lot of fast mana here. We are lacking some of the typical other rituals, like we're not playing Dark Ritual, we are only more or less playing Dockside, so I can see that an post-Adnos is not gonna be super good. And yeah, we do have something like a Deadeye Navigator inside this deck, so yeah, but there is a consideration how you could potentially tweak this build. I think an Adnos could actually fit in here, depending on how you would like to tweak it. And on the other hand, you could definitely keep Deadeye Navigator, because that works great with Dockside too. But let's take a look at some more details. What you're seeing here is all those 64 decks the inclusion rate of ad nauseum. So the circle diagram is showcasing an inclusion rate of 65.6, which means that 42 decks include ad nos, and the average win rate of all Kenrith decks together is something around 21. The decks that include ad nos, however, have an average win rate of 18.59 or 60.60, which means that the decks that actually include ad nos have an average lower win rate compared to the total average of all Kenrith decks. Now here's a problem with Kenrith: you can actually build it in a lot of different ways, and because of that you have a very spread out collection of cards people play. For example, we have something like 379 unique cards among all the 64 Kenrith decks, which means that they are all more or less different. For example, there's one deck that actually runs something of a stacks, and that one deck got a good success rate in that tournament. I mean, it also plays Archon of Emeria, that one deck that got a 42.86% win rate, but you can't really pull statistics from that. One deck did include Boromir, one deck did include Birthing Pod, one deck did include Codex Shredder, one deck did try Channeler Initiate, one deck did test Compost, didn't go so well for that deck. But yeah, once again, the sample size is too low. Fairy Mastermind is played by 5 decks of the 64, and those 5 decks actually had a pretty good win rate, but the sample size is still very, very low. Like, we're just seeing a very low sample size of Kenrith decks with a very huge spread of what they're doing. So the takeaway from this video is that you can't really learn much. However, here you actually have a pretty, the sample size is not too small, 50-50 split, and 32 decks did include Emil the Blessed, and they actually had a good result from that. So we can get a tiny indication of what cards are good currently in the format, and how you could potentially build Kenrith. And also seeing some cards that maybe doesn't work out. But once again, the sample size here is very, very low. So Kenrith had an average win rate that was a little bit lower compared to some of the other commander decks you saw on my little showcase in the beginning. And here I want to showcase something. Fierce Guardianship has a very low inclusion rate. However, it is, in my opinion, a really good card. Now, when you are including Fierce Guardianship inside your deck, your win rate actually goes lower. Basically, Kenrith is a really expensive commander, something you really can't get into play that early in the game compared to a Rograk, Nayela, Stisei, Kinnan. You get the point. So a small conclusion, I could be wrong, this is just like a philosophical idea that I have. The reason why Kenrith has this lower win rate compared to the average among other commanders might be because it can't play or can't utilize Fierce Guardianship as equally good as other decks can. The same thing if we actually look at Deflecting Sword, a really low inclusion rate, about 15%, played by 10 decks out of 64, and the average win rate of those decks that did include this thing is sadder, quite low. But once again, Deflecting Sword is a really good card currently in the format, and Kenrith can't utilize it, and therefore Kenrith's average win rate might drop compared to the other commanders. Or that's my philosophical conclusion ID, what I personally believe at the very least. Deadly Relic is the black version of the two. Now the sample size here is just too low, so we can't say anything really from it. However, when we're playing cards like this, Final Fortune. Now Final Fortune is usually getting a really good win rate on the average on decks that actually include it. This is something I've seen on Nayela and other decks that can include Final Fortune. And also sometimes when they also include Warrior's Oath and Chance of Glory, the win rate goes even up as well. This is a very, very low sample size. However, I want to point something out. In my experience, I look at a lot of different commander statistics, and I've looked at Gitaxian Probin, Rogsai, Tivit, Nayela, and it is in general performing quite bad. It looks like a card that you probably shouldn't play. Some decks have been playing Laboratory Maniac, a very low sample size though. The deck that we did take a look at were playing Kinnan Bounder Prodigy. and that seems to be doing good. This is actually a really good indication of like Kenrith's struggling. Like Jewel Lotus is it's a card that usually gets a very good win rate on other commander decks that I've looked at. Here it is more or less a 50-50 split among the decks that have been including it among Kenrith decks, and the ones that does include it gets a average lower win rate compared to the total average of all Kenrith decks. Lofo Corrupted Sheriff seems to be performing quite well. Oh wow, mana drain. So we have a 30% inclusion rate. Now the sample size isn't huge once again, but it's a win rate close to 30% among the decks that did include mana drain. Among all the Kenrith decks, Mnemonic Betrayal is it's actually honestly close to the average win rate of Kenrith in general, I'm gonna say here. This is also pretty much the same as the average, more or less. Kenrith can do a lot of different things, like you can build Kenrith in so many strange ways, but here we go. Razaketh, the full-blooded, 3 decks have taken it to a tournament, a very low inclusion rate, and they didn't perform that well among them. But yeah, once again, the sample size here is very low. Wow, there are just so many strange ways to play Kenrith. I think I have found that one of the decks actually play a egg deck, Second Sunrise. And yeah, we have a lot of these egg artifacts. Oh, we don't have many, we have one deck that included all of the egg decks, and that deck with the Second Sunrise and all that stuff didn't work so well. And that is absolutely something to take into consideration as well, that there are players that build strange IDs. Now I actually want to say that I like that people do play strange IDs and rogue decks and experiment, because experimenting leads to improvements, and sometimes we can see that yeah, an experiment works out. We should try to see if we can follow that path more and see if we can develop something, or experiment and say okay, that didn't work out, let's abandon that idea and move towards another direction. But when you experiment, when you play fringe and rogue decks and such, you learn more about what works and what doesn't work. So don't look at the average win rate as a proof of exactly how good or how bad Kenrith is. You need to take a lot of different things into consideration. It's when you look at cards like this that you learn something. So here we are looking at once again how many decks are playing Teferi and the average win rate among those decks that are including Teferi, and Teferi seems to be doing good. The One Ring is also performing quite well. Now I've looked at a lot of different commanders and I've looked at the inclusion of the One Ring, and usually when commanders are including the One Ring, it seems to be doing good. Touch the Spirit Realm is showcasing a good potential result. Vegan or Vigi, I don't know exactly how to pronounce that Graft Mage, but it's showcasing a potential. The sample size is just too low, so we can't really say anything in detail, but it's, like I said previously, it's good to experiment because you see IDs and you learn more. So this is something you could experiment further on, so to say, with. The sample size isn't terrible, inclusion rate of 10% or 11% basically. Well, the sample size to begin with, 64 decks, is quite low still, but it's showcasing a potential worth it at looking more into, I would say. This is interesting. Usually when I look at Simian Spirit Guide in other decks, you're seeing that the win rate by including Simian Spirit Guide is actually quite good. I think I'm onto something here. Gilded Drake. So Gilded Drake currently has a 34.4 inclusion rate played by 22 decks, and the average win rate by including Gilded Drake is actually quite good. However, in opposite to Simian Spirit Guide, usually when I look at Gilded Drake, it has a lower win rate compared to the average. So now I'm seeing the opposite. I'm seeing a good win rate on Gilded Drake and a bad win rate on Simian Spirit Guide. So a takeaway and a philosophical conclusion, just my personal ideas here, I could absolutely be wrong, is that maybe Kenrith should play more towards the mid-range game plan, so to say, because this is more of a mid-range control card, and this Ape Spirit is more of a turbo card. This is a turbo card. This is a mid-range card that you play for the long game. It's not a good combo card. This is a good mid-range card, or well, it's good in most decks. The sample size is very low, but this is also a mid-range card. This is something you don't normally play in turbo decks, it's something you play in mid-range decks. So it's something of a mid-range card, I would say. This is something of an utility mid-range card as well. Another mid-range card that is performing a better win rate compared to the average of all Kenrith decks together. Sylvan Library has a 22.5 win rate, where Kenrith has something of 21. So close to the same, but a tiny bit better. The One Ring, a mid-range card, actually played by turbo decks too. I should actually add in as well. A Stacks control card, Orcish Bowmaster, actually played in some turbo decks, I've noticed, but usually played less, and the average win rate among turbo decks that actually play this is usually a little bit lower. It is a give and take good, but here it seems to be performing quite well. So a potential conclusion when we're analyzing Kenrith and trying to learn from the statistics here is that Kenrith could be struggling because the CMC of him is quite expensive compared to the other commanders he is going up against. Which means that he can't really play those key cards, Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting SWAT and similar things like that. I could absolutely be wrong on that, because Atraxa seems to be doing quite well, even though she actually has a much higher CMC and a better win rate. However, if you look at the amount of mana spent to gain value from Atraxa, you're basically spending 7 mana to gain an enormous amount of value. You need to spend 9 mana to actually gain value, or actually to gain 1 card from Kenrith. So when you take that into account, then yeah, Kenrith might actually be more expensive compared to Atraxa. And the other conclusion is that because the commander is a little bit slower, you might be better off playing a form of mid-range deck that is usually playing a maybe longer game, but do have a clear functional combo to go towards. And Kenrith actually has a lot of them. Like we're seeing a mixture of Serda the Dawnwaker, and when you combine that with Grim Monolith, you have a 2-card combo for infinite colorless mana, which you can't actually do anything with. You need to convert it into blue to draw your deck, but still. It is Serda and the Grim Monolith are individually good on their own, and they seem to be performing a good result, kinda. But when you look at Ariok Salvagers and Lion's Eye Diamond is actually close to the average. I can see that because Undulled Reach is actually pretty good, but it seems to be performing a little bit less compared to what Serda and Grim Monolith was showcasing. However, the sample size is still quite low, so it's hard to say that this is correct. But there are obviously better and worse combos to basically go for. I personally don't like Deadeye Navigator. I think it's a bad card. My personal intuition and personal beliefs is saying cut Deadeye and play Adnos instead. But the statistics is telling us otherwise. So this is a very interesting result to actually see. And I like when I'm wrong. Maybe Deadeye Navigator is better than I think it is. This is actually one of the big reasons why I really like this kind of video that I'm currently making here, because it's not my opinion. You're seeing results from statistics, or something of the sort. I mean, numbers don't lie. Decks that have had Deadeye Navigator and have entered into tournaments, now they are very low, have actually performed quite well. So it looks like it's working out. If you bring Deadeye Navigator inside your Kenrith deck, it's showcased by other previous players to work out. Sample size is a little bit too low, but this one didn't work out equally. In other words, the winning deck that we did take a look at seems to be a good representation of what actually works out. We did see that Orcish Bowmaster had a good average win rate, Gilded Drake good, Displacer Kitten good, Deadeye Navigator good, not including Adnos seems to be correct, Lofo good, Kinan good, Phyrexian Metamorph good, Emil was good, Touch the Spirit Realm also had a good average win rate. But I like to say this in my videos as well. Statistics is not everything. Player skill, luck, and also different tournaments have a little bit of a different metagame, so what works in one tournament might not work in another tournament. But I hope you learned something new and got inspired in any form of way. I personally really like these videos. They're fun to do and they bring something more than just opinions. They bring some numbers and then some conclusion around those numbers. But if you have any feedback on how to calculate things and maybe you want to see something specific, leave that in the comments below and I will try to calculate that. One such comment actually asked for all the different percentage available and then people could just look at it individually on the MOM. So in the future I'm actually gonna post this entire list of all the 300 and if YouTube actually allows me to do that, because the list is actually quite long, but I will post that in the comments below of the video myself.